welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's episode is all about employment status. So there is two different types of employees. There's a W-2 employee and a contractor, a 1099. So I know for me, I had no idea what any of this was. I just figured everybody has a W-2 that you turn in when you file your taxes, and that was it. It wasn't until I started looking into group practices that I was seeing this come up a lot more, and I wasn't really clear on what the differences were then. But now, having worked at a group practice, having had friends who've worked in different spaces and had different employment statuses, or classifications, it's been clearer to me. So I want to help make that clear to you all. I know most jobs, agencies, hospitals, kind of the typical jobs that therapists will be in would most likely be a W-2 position. So a W-2 employee is, again, what the majority of people are. If you worked at Starbucks in college, or I know I worked at Old Navy in college, you were just a W-2 employee. So that is a typical employee where you are, you're an employee of that agency. And you'll hear the differences later. But you are considered an employee versus a contractor. You are employed at that place. You are on their roster. They potentially have some sort of benefits package for you. The biggest benefit of being a W-2 employee is that the employer will pay half of your taxes. So if you've ever been a W-2 employee and you've gotten your paycheck or your pay stub, and you look at what all the taxes are, you will pay a certain percentage of your federal tax, and you'll see it split with your employer. So that part's nice because then they're covering a bit of the cost, and legally they have to. So it's nice, but it's also an obligation. But that's part of being a W-2 employee. They have a bit more control over you, so they get to dictate, like, you have to be at these meetings that we have monthly, you have to do these specific trainings, stuff like that. But they also potentially can give you more benefits, like CEU reimbursement, or paid time off, or stuff along those lines. Now, every job is going to be a little bit different. So in terms of, say that you're deciding you want to look into possibly working at a group practice. And for group practices, you'll see most of the time the positions are split. Some of the ones that you'll apply to or you'll look at will say it's for a 1099 position, and some will say it's for W-2. And again, I didn't know what that meant. Back then, I'd only ever seen W-2. So I think for you all who are looking at jobs, potentially figuring out what paths to go down, possibly even starting your own group practice and seeing what types of employees that you would want to hire. A W-2 employees, for some reasons, like I said, benefits, for the taxes, stuff like that, a lot of people prefer to be a W-2 employee because they want those things. So if you're prioritizing that, then W-2 is the way to go. I think it can be beneficial for you in a lot of ways. And stuff like taxes and things are just easier because it's on you actually get a pay stub, and it's shown for you, the percentage is taken out, all of that. And that could be really nice. It's less work for you overall. So when you're a W-2 employee, for the most part, you just show up and you go to work and you do your job and you come home. And a lot of people just really prefer that and prioritize that. So there are a couple downsides. So like I said, you don't have as much control over your free time. And I don't mean free time in, like, when you're off of work. I mean, with different types of jobs, and we'll get to that with the 1099 discussion, but if you're a W-2 employee, you are obligated to be there for the trainings and the different things that are required of your job. So for some people, that can be frustrating if they really value that flexibility and freedom. If those are the requirements, that's what you got to do. And the other downside is that you can't write off any business expenses. So a lot of times when people hear you write stuff off as a business owner, if you're not really clear on that, then it can feel like you get it for free. Write it off on your taxes, you're good to go. But that's not the case. So what that means is when your taxes get taken out, they get taken out after your expenses are taken out. So you're getting taxed on less of an amount, which means you'll pay less tax. You're not writing anything off in a way that like suddenly it's free because it was for your business. You're just not getting taxed on it, essentially. But if you're a W-2 employee, anything that you're buying out of pocket for your job, you can't write off at all. So I know when COVID hit, I was working at a group practice as a W-2 employee. Suddenly I'm home and I didn't have a setup for that. I didn't have a desk. I didn't have a chair. I didn't have a printer at that point. Like there was just certain ink. There was certain things I just didn't really have. I didn't really need that at my house. I'd always gone to an office and worked where I had access to those things. So when COVID hit and suddenly it was like, oh, we're going to be home for a while, I had to buy a chair. I had to buy a desk. I had to buy a printer because some stuff you have to just physically sign and then scan it and send it to clients. And that sucked because that was just my money. It had to come out of my bank account and I couldn't write anything off. So that wasn't the greatest, but it was just part of the job. So there's definitely ups and downs to being a W-2 employee. So to give you the other side of things, if you were a 1099, which is a contractor, you have a lot more flexibility. Essentially, you don't work for the company in the way W-2 employees do. You contract with the company. So if you're a 1099, you are your own business. Even if you haven't filed the business paperwork and all of that, you're a sole proprietor, essentially. So what that means is like you are your own business entity. So when they contract with you, you are now your own entity who is working for them with only the things that are within your specific contract. So there's a lot of other requirements sometimes, certain meetings or certain other things that you might not have to do. Also, there's been a lot of this over the last few years in the therapy space especially, but a lot of times jobs will call you a 1099 employee, so contractor, but expect you to do things that are W-2 related. So it's very controversial sometimes to be a 1099 employee because it could be that the place you're working at just doesn't want to pay your part of the taxes. So they're calling you all contractors. But at the end of the day, they're asking you to do all of these requirements that are really only for a W-2 employee. A lot of times too, if you're provisionally licensed or you have an associate license, and places are asking you to be a 1099, that could be tricky because if you're relying on that place, that supervisor, that owner for supervision, you're not an independent worker. A lot of times admins at some of these practices and businesses, they're classified as a 1099, but they really shouldn't be. They should be a W-2 because everything that they're doing is related to this practice. So, and they're required to do certain meetings and certain things that are kind of not in line with what the federal guidelines are for 1099s. So that part can get a little bit tricky. And so double check too, as you are looking at what some of these positions are, that the actual requirements, if they say you're a 1099 and the requirements for your actual job responsibilities or the things that they're asking you to do or that they aren't providing feel like it's something a W-2 employee would do, you might want to reconsider working at that place because a lot of people are getting in trouble for that right now. And you wouldn't, but just, look into that. So for a 1099, like I said, you're essentially your own business and you're working now with a different place. And so when you are coming in as a 1099, if it's a place that has a split, like a lot of group practices have splits, so the owner keeps a percentage and you get a percentage, look for a higher split. So if you're a 1099, typically you might be getting a 70-30 split. You get the 70% of whatever you bring in and they get the 30. And so part of the reason you get that higher split than a W-2 employee might is because you're paying your own taxes. So when you are a 1099, they'll pay you the money that you made after your split, but now you have to go in and you have to save that percentage of taxes. So a lot of times people say save 30% across the board, and you have to pay taxes quarterly, just as if you were your own business owner. Because now that you're not a W-2 and your taxes are not being pulled immediately out of each check, you're responsible for doing the calculations for all of that. So if you're a 1099, you probably want to have some sort of accountant. You want to cover your bases and make sure that you have a separate savings account for your taxes, and you're tracking stuff in some way, whether it's you or the actual like accountant or bookkeeper that's doing that for you. But you have to make sure you're pulling that out. So if you get paid $1,000, you might need to pull out $300 and immediately put that into a savings account, and now really you only got paid $700. And so for some people, they may get a little bit more as a W-2. Like a lot of W-2 employees at group practices might get like a 60-40 split. So you're getting 60%. But usually it's all pretty close to even. So do the math on that too, if possible. So you could figure out, and I'll do another video on that next probably, about like what the splits look like and stuff at group practices. But so as for 1099, yeah, there's the downside sometimes of, okay, you've got to, really manage your finances. You have to take out your own taxes. You have to log in and pay your own quarterly taxes. You have to just be really on top of your finances in a way you wouldn't have to necessarily when it came to, like, if you were a W-2 employee. But the upside is you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to the job. You still have to abide by the rules of the place, but you are not obligated to do as many things as a W-2 might be. And also, because you're technically your own business now, you can write stuff off. So had I been a 1099 when COVID hit, I could have saved the receipts for my chair, for my office space. I could have saved the receipts for the desk, the printer, the ink, the ring light I used when it was too dark outside. Paper I bought for the printer. Any stuff we had to mail sometimes on our own. Like I could have saved the receipts for all of those things and been able to use them as expenses. So now I pay a little bit less taxes at the end of the year because I got taxed on less income. So yeah, there's that benefit, which can be really big. And sometimes that also helps when you're like, ugh, I'm used to my employers paying for, half of my taxes or whatever, like the taxes you'd get taken out of each check. But then you look at what you might be able to get reimbursed for, or not reimbursed, but what you can claim, right, on your taxes, and be like, here's this amount of expenses. Sometimes that evens out, or it's a little bit closer to it. So depending on how much supplies, like if you're an art therapist, we're having all the supplies. So sometimes that might really work in your favor to be a 1099 and to be able to claim that. And, not get taxed on so much income because now those expenses were taken out of your gross income. So maybe I need to do a video on that too. Those were things, gross income and net income and all of that stuff that I wasn't very clear on before. Again, I just, for years and years and years, went to work and got my check and pay stub and moved along. So there's this whole world here with all of this stuff that wasn't taught to me in any kind of program, or no jobs really explained this to me. So I just learned along the way from my experiences and other people's, good or bad. So I hope that this clarifies things a little bit for you. So to sum it up, if you're a W-2 employee, there's benefits. There's usually a benefits package, potentially. You might get some paid time off. You might get some reimbursement for continuing education. You have some of your taxes paid for, and you get a pay stub and a paycheck. Then you're good to go. But you also are subjected to all of the changes and rules that the place you work at makes. You're going to be under a lot more obligations and have a lot less freedom and flexibility. If you're a 1099, you have to pay your own taxes. You have to be really on top of your finances, and you may need some sort of accountant. But you have a lot more flexibility in the work that you do, and you can claim any expenses that you have bought, spent money on, whatever else. So there's definitely pros and cons to each position. And depending on where you are in life and what you need, what you don't need, what you value, you're going to choose a different route potentially. So sometimes when people are just coming into the field, a W-2 employee sounds the best because everything's mostly done for you. And you might not be used to or really crave as much flexibility to start out with because you're just trying to get your hours and do your stuff. So that might not be as big of a deal. But as time goes on, or as you get more comfortable with money and finances, you want more of that flexibility, you're independently licensed, that's more of a priority to you than the money part. As far as the taxes, maybe you're like, I'll figure that part out, I know how to do it. Then you might want more of that 1099 type of position because you get some more freedom that comes with that. So, and you're also more prepared if in the future you decide to open your own business. Now you've been able to manage some of the financial piece of that without having the entire business on your plate yet. So it's good practice as well. So again, there's kind of pros and cons to each. When you are out here applying for jobs, really look into what type of job it is so that you can get a better understanding and make a fully informed decision about if that is going to work for you at this stage of your life. And also, like I mentioned earlier, if it is a 1099 position, make sure as you're interviewing and asking questions, you are very clear and they are very clear on exactly what your obligations are so that they aren't treating you like a W-2 with more restrictions or more that they're asking of you. And you're really a 1099. So look into that, ask the right questions. But I hope that this was helpful. I know that this is all kind of murky. It's not super clear sometimes. You're just like, I just want a job. Like, I don't even care. At least that's how I know most people were those last few months of grad school. Probably around this time of the final semester. It's like January, looking at, oh my gosh, we're going to graduate in a few months. And we're going to need a job. And we're going to have to start getting our hours. And we're going to have to get our license and pass the exam and do all of these things. There was a lot of pressure. And I've seen some people, even friends, be put into positions or take positions technically that they were just like, oh, it's a job, it's great. And they didn't really understand the ins and outs of these different types of jobs. So I know I had a friend once who said that years before when she had worked, she didn't know you were supposed to pay your own taxes as a 1099. The place was like, oh, you're a 1099, you get your paycheck and you're good to go. And she didn't even think about that piece of it. So when it came time to file taxes and she hadn't saved for that and hadn't paid any of the quarterly taxes over the course of the year, then she had a huge tax bill that she had to pay. So be very clear on what your obligations are in either position. And like I said, what you're comfortable doing right now. You may be at a point that you want to stay in one status and that changes as your life changes or your experience or your wants or needs change. So it's okay. But really look into that aspect of it. Don't just jump because it's a job. Really look into what that job would entail, not only with what work you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis, but some of this stuff like taxes and how it will affect you. So since I'm in the US, all of this is very United States based. Things may be different. They likely are in other countries. So if you are in another spot, maybe see if there's something similar in your country that is like this, or really pay attention to if there's taxes or there's certain things that need to be taken out of your checks. Really look into that and clarify a little bit more about what your employee classification is so that you can make sure that you aren't in trouble later down the line. So good luck, get paid, figure out the best way that that can happen for you. And I hope that this episode clarified some things. Feel free to comment below if you feel that you need a little bit more clarification, or if you have any experience as either a W-2 or a 1099, good or bad, and share that, and we can not gatekeep any information out here. So good luck, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.